Hey John,
Yeah,
were you like name dropping yourself in the reading that we did?
maybe. Was I?
I was like, is that John Hellerman? And then I looked at the references and it was like Jay Hellerman, and I was like, John?
That's me. That's me they're referring to. Yeah.
Also, I wanted to respond to your email, but I was just really busy about the McNair thing.
Mm-hmm.
I already submitted the application and I've met with Kim already. And we have started to compile a folder of readings, and I actually ordered 5 books on Amazon that are supposed to help me with the research. And yeah.
Great.
Also, she told me that I should ask you about Madison.
Madison, University of Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Sure. It's a fine place. It's very cold in the winter. Yeah, well, we should talk about it sometime.
Hopefully on Monday after class, we could do that.
Yeah. The thing is, Kim Brown may know different people at the University of Wisconsin than I know. So she may be thinking about somebody that I don't know about.
Mm.
I know one of her advisees, somebody who did his MA here, I don't know, maybe about 4 years ago now, he's working there.
Interesting.
Yeah, center, he's working in a research center. It's called Wisconsin Center for Education Research.
I think that's what she wanted me to talk to you about, because she wanted me to look into the linguistic education research kind of thing. And so she wanted me to talk to Alyssa, because Penn State is really a big one that we're looking at right now. And then she said Madison would be a good one too, if I'm trying to stay in country. So.
Yeah, well, that's good that you're talking about that stuff. There's another student, and I don't know if Kim mentioned him, but he was interested in language policy. He's doing a graduate program now. I think it's called multilingualism. It's just a graduate program in multilingualism. So I don't know if he's doing any language planning and policy stuff, but that's at the University of Ottawa, Canada. But of course, he's not in Canada.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, well, I can tell you about him too when we meet next time. Okay, good morning, everybody. So it is time to start the class. So that's the schedule. Your papers due Monday. I'm assuming you've seen the guidelines on D2L. And then there's a reading on reference to persons for next time. I got this backwards. It's Sachs and Shegloff, 1979. And we'll continue talking about storytelling in reference to persons next time. And then on Wednesday, there's no class because it's Veterans Day and the state of Oregon observes that and closes the university. So we'll spend some time talking about the Peckerick-Dröller and Berger reading, and then talk a little bit about storytelling after that. So have you got questions about syllabus type of things?
I guess just a clarification on the paper. So you want, like, I was a little confused about like formatting and that kind of stuff, because that wasn't really mentioned in the guidelines, and how like long you wanted the paper to be. And I didn't know if you wanted the analysis to be 3 to 4 pages and the paper to be like longer, or.
Well, the whole paper's 3 to 4 pages. This, just follow standard conventions for formatting a paper, which, I'm sure you talked about in other classes.
Do you want APA or do you want like MLA?
APA style is used in our department generally. I think I've said before, I'm not a big style kind of person for styles of papers. Other instructors are, so it is a good question to ask. And for me, it's just important that the transcript conventions are followed, and that the transcript excerpts are accurate, or as accurate as can be. The rest of the paper, just general things. It should be the right size of font so I can read it easily enough, and of course, standard spelling conventions, etc. Are there other questions about that paper, other things like that?
Some people in the chat are saying, I thought it was due Friday and not Monday. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I got the syllabus here, week 7, 9th of November. It says analysis paper. I don't know if there's conflicting information, but. So if there's some conflicting information someplace, let me know, and then we can work something out. Okay. All right, let's then, before we get to the discussion, so just to put this into a little bit of context. So the paper, as you read, is about development of practices for starting stories by a learner of French. And it's also about interactional competence, which is now, fairly old. It's been around a while. But you might have heard about competence in the sense of Noam Chomsky's division between competence and performance. And in linguistics, this has been a very influential division, the division of competence and performance, in that a lot of linguists haven't paid a lot of attention for many years to the performance aspect of linguistics, because Chomsky in linguistics has been very influential. So for a lot of linguists, the domain of study was competence, which is kind of what are the constraints on human language, or what are the constraints to show evidence for something like a universal grammar, and what has been called native speaker knowledge of language. And I put native speaker in quotations because that's not a term that I like to use. And if it is used, that it needs to be used carefully and with a reason for using it. So in the 60s and 70s, then Del Hymes picked this up and said, well, there's a lot of focus on the competence aspect of language. What about people actually using the language? What about the performance aspect? And he started to talk about what he called communicative competence. And he was interested in looking at language use, being a sociolinguist that he was, and he developed a kind of a methodology for looking at language use called ethnography of speaking, which was quite, it's been developed quite a bit and used by anthropological linguists and sociolinguists. And then this also came into second language acquisition. People started talking about communicative competence in the 70s and 80s, and it was actually a theory from linguistics that went into language teaching that became responsible for something called the communicative language teaching, the idea that people should be using language in order to learn it. So the focus of communicative competence, however, was on the individual speaker. And then in late 1990s, early 2000s, Richard Young, Joan Kelly Hall, and other people started thinking about, well, when people use language, they're not individuals generally. They're using the language with interlocutors. And so they said, maybe we should be thinking about communicative competence as interactional competence, so people interacting with other people. So that is where interactional competence comes from. So the idea is that when you're looking at interactional competence, you're looking at a person's competence to interact with other people. And where that becomes particularly problematic is tracing language development and language change, because if you're trying to focus on the change in somebody's repertoire of language practices, you would say, well, but they're always doing it with somebody else. So how, it's not the individual's responsibility for the change, it's because they're interacting with somebody else. And the authors in this study today do refer to that, the difficulty of isolating and controlling variables to study if you're talking about something like interactional competence. So that's all I want to do for the framing of that. And then after the discussion, I'll talk more about storytelling and we'll hopefully do a little bit of analysis of some storytelling. So before I put you into groups, have you got questions that you want to address? I'm going to find breakout rooms. And then in the breakout rooms, if you have questions or issues, you can call me into the room and I will be there. I'll join you, whatever it might be. Otherwise, I trust that you will be able to carry on and discuss and question and activate knowledge from the readings. I'm just looking to see here. So let's see, was Rebecca, Carrie, and Mac, right? And okay, now I've put you into rooms and I may have to rework these. So if you get changed, don't be alarmed. So in 20 minutes, we'll come back. So that'll be about 10:45. And we'll all talk together then. So have you got questions or things you want to talk about with respect to the article?
I had a question that my group answered kind of differently than I expected, but it helped me gain a new perspective on it. My question was, do L2 learners learn storytelling skills just from conversations that they're in, or are there other ways to receive that input that include conversation that's as effective for learning?
Oh, so what were the different answers?
Well, when I read it on my own and I developed this question in my brain, I was like, oh, you could just consume media that has conversation. You could just watch The Simpsons in French and learn, storytelling skills. But my group was like, well, a big part of interactional, conversation is like reacting to people's, speech acts and seeing how effective. So your participation is important in that to see how people react to you. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, I don't think it's harmful to watch media in another language, but I think that's right. The whole interactional part of it is about how you can be improvisational and adapt and adjust to what the other person is doing.
But I mean, what about those like kid shows where, I mean, like if someone's learning another language and they're a child and they're watching like Dora, when they're like, where is the X? Like, does that count?
I'm not saying, yeah, it counts. I'm not saying that. I said I think it's a good. I think media is a good resource for use for learning another language. But if the question is, do you learn interactional competence to a high degree? It seems like you have to be interacting with a person that is using the language with you. I mean, you've probably had that experience. You learned, you did a classroom, or you learned a language in a classroom through a book or something like that, and then you went someplace where people were actually using the language, and it was a little bit difficult. Some people would even say impossible, or, I mean, that was my experience. Like, wow, these people aren't talking like my textbook should, and fast speech and all kinds of interactional things that are impossible to learn out of a book.
That came up with language learning apps in our group, how language learning apps weren't really effective at teaching you that kind of thing, like how people would react to you and how you say things. Yeah.
And I think it's related to this. So this article, we read it last week about how people do repair, they experiment how people do repair with bots or with a human face interaction. And there is something about that. It affects the way an interaction can go, just like the Zoom. The media affects how the language actually works. For me, one of the most interesting things about this article was that this person was living in a household, and the ability to interact with somebody when you're brand new to a situation like a household is going to be very different than after 9 months or a year that you've been living with the family. I mean, once you become kind of more part of the family, you're certainly going to be interacting in a different way. And there's nothing a researcher can do about that, like to control for variables or something. It's just a natural process. So when somebody's language proficiency is changing, it's changing in a particular context. So that And that's not something you can account for or control for. So that's why doing research on language learning is really very difficult. Okay, let's have, let's see, at least one more question or comment from another group before I start lecturing.
We spoke about a few things. We talked about if she had had other languages, how would that have impacted her ability to do the storytelling? We also had a lot of questions about, because there were some people in our group that weren't familiar with German, that it would have been really useful to have some discussion about the difference between German and French and how that might have affected the interactions.
Well, that's okay. So why do you think the researcher didn't do that? Or why would a researcher be able to get away with not discussing the nature of the two languages? Or
Oh,
how do you
well,
think-
my
Yeah.
expectation is because it's German and French, they're very, very common languages and they've been highly researched and you can find that information pretty easily.
Hmm.
That's my assumption.
That's probably part of it.
I would say also because it's a specific speaker, we don't know like her they might have, but they're not projecting like her dialect or her background, her individual background. I don't think you could take out the factors of her being an individual as well as her speaking German.
Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it, definitely. So if you can say, this is how, I mean, can you talk about, I think there's an assumption here that there are storytelling procedures and an order for doing storytelling that is universal. I think that's the first point, even though they don't come out and say that. I think that's the assumption, that people do storytelling cross-culturally, cross-linguistically in similar ways or follow a similar pattern. And then the other thing about how much context do you provide? And in a conversation analytic analysis and paper, you don't have to provide a lot of context, because the context, you show when context is relevant for the speakers themselves. So you see a lot of, in these excerpts, you can see that the one person is acting in a way like a mother and one person is acting like a caretaker, au pair, and that in a way that becomes relevant in their interaction. But to say how much context is important to give for each person, like, okay, they speak German, French, they learn Spanish, and maybe they learned a little bit of Finnish, but the question for a CA analysis is that relevant to the participants? Okay, so let's talk now about I think this is also this article is maybe unusual, because I think when people learn a language formally, they often don't talk about things like, how do you get a story started in a conversation? I don't know if that reflects your experience or not, or have you had, when you've learned a language, have you had instruction about doing something like that, launching a story?
Right now in my language class, I'm studying Japanese, and we're actually talking about, like, it wasn't a big section of what we were talking about, but we talked about storytelling. And what they told us was, like, when you're talking about something and you ask, like, oh, how was your interaction with your friend, and then you can like quote what people said and explain how that made you feel. But it's not like once upon a time, like storybook telling, but it's like, well, but yeah, that's kind of.
So something like it, but not exactly. Securing recipiency and making sure that your story is sequentially relevant and making sure that it has implications for the other party. Yeah, those things aren't usually formally taught. And people would ask, really, can they be formally taught? I just sent you a poll, which I want to get results from because this will possibly affect some future readings, depending on how you answer the poll. And it is a forced choice, and but that's the nature of multiple choice polls. Okay, let's then move forward here. Are you seeing a PowerPoint slide?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So conversational storytelling has been researched since the 70s. So it's a phenomenon that was studied because it occurs in everyday interaction. People do this, they tell stories. And when we talked about repair, remember there are these competing tensions in an interaction between progressivity, that is the conversation should continue, it shouldn't come to a stop, so people want to maintain the progress of an interaction, but they also need to make sure that people are understanding one another. That's the intersubjectivity part, and that's where repair comes in. Well, when storytelling comes into the picture, if we're talking about progressivity and turn taking back and forth, A takes a turn, B takes a turn, A takes a turn, B takes a turn, etc. One question is, how does that turn taking get suspended? How does the back and forth part of the turn taking get altered? And that's what needs to happen when you get into a story. So you may have noticed this already in your own data, and sometimes it's really easy to see in a transcript when you see line, and all of a sudden you see one participant has like 4 lines. Something's going on there. Somebody's having a longer turn. And the question is, why is somebody having a longer turn there? It may be because they're doing some kind of storytelling. So this is what the research does. It shows how it happens, how it gets done, where it happens in a sequence. And you try to discover, is it relevant to the topic? That is it locally occasioned? That is, when somebody tells a story, usually it's because of something that came up prior in the conversation. Does somebody, when they're telling a story, do they do work to secure recipiency? That is, do they tell the story in a way that they're getting the other participant to hear it as a story, to be a story recipient? And when they launch the story, what do they do to project that this is going to be a story, or this is going to be a longer turn, or there's more talk coming here? So that's the analysis that people do in conversational storytelling. Why do they do it? Sometimes they do it because there was a story just before, so that a second participant tells a second story that was related to the previous. Sometimes they tell stories because they're like kind of checking out with their co-participant. Wasn't that the way it really happened? Like collaborative kind of work. But this first bullet point is probably a key, that participants tell stories for particular recipients. So you can tell the same story to different people, and you're going to tell it a different way because of the person or people that you're telling it to. So this is oh yeah, I sent this handout on email, but I'll just send it now because these examples are all there. Lesson 18, storytelling. So this is the first idea that these things are locally occasioned. So in this interaction, Roger and Ken are talking, and Ken mentions a place up on Mulholland. And then Roger starts a story. Oh, have you ever taken those Mulholland time trials? You go up, and he starts a story. So this is an idea that this is just evidence for how a story can come up because of something that happened just previously. And that's what's CA people call it being locally occasioned. So the occasion for telling this story is because of some local sequential property. It's something that happened in the talk. That's why the story gets launched, or there's evidence for that here. There's prefacing work that goes on in stories, sometimes very obvious like this. I'll tell you something, or I want to tell you something, or have you ever heard this story? People do that sometimes very explicitly, not every time. So here's this thing, a pre-announcement, a preface to a story. And then this, which was in the article too, which CA people call Tri-Mart Intonation. And it means kind of like what it sounds. It's like somebody is saying something and they're like trying it, like, was that right? It's kind of a way to elicit, to check with the other person. There was a big race out in the valley, and you raise your intonation kind of like eliciting, like, oh yeah, I heard about that, or no, I don't know about it. In this case, there's no response after that. So then Roger just continues with the story. So what you might expect to see after something like this is some kind of acknowledgement, like, oh yeah, I've heard about that, or no, I don't know anything about it. Here, there's no response to it. So in this one, okay, it's the beginning of the call here, and how are you? Fine. And then I think her name's Margie. She says, oh, you're not in on what happened. No. So there's some reason that it's hearable up here that Margie is saying, oh, you don't know this information that I know. And then Margie goes on to tell a story. So there's some orientation here to a speaker's knowledge or lack of knowledge. And that's part of what happens before somebody tells a story. So when you realize somebody doesn't know something, then you can tell the story about it. Then another aspect in conversational storytelling is what the recipient is doing. So recipients have to cooperate if somebody's going to do a longer telling. So in this case, this is Margie's story. So the car, it's parked in the garage because it's damn cold. And as a matter of fact, it's snowing on the Ridge route. No response. So I took the airport, you could buy a ticket, pause. So he could get on standby, pause. Then you have like some sort of back channel or receipt token. And I left him there about noon. And so what you see the recipient doing here is just listening, waiting, not taking a turn. And then in line 27 and 30, when Tony does take a turn, you can call these things, this one, especially line 27, is a receipt token. And it just means I hear what you're saying. It's not strongly evaluative, like, wow, oh my God, that's incredible or something. It's just a minor indication of recipiency. And same as line 30. So this is some kind of recipient behavior. So in this one, we have again a story preface. I thought I'd better report to you what happened at Bullock's today. So you know there's going to be a report. There's going to be some kind of story. And B clearly hears that. What in the world's happened? So this is the cooperative aspect of it. Can be more or less explicit. Recipients don't have to say something like, what in the world happened? They can just say, okay, tell me, or, oh, what, or maybe nothing. Then also recipient behavior, like showing appreciation. So here we've just got some minimal, a story is going on here between Maggie and Jean, and so Maggie's telling the story. And you see Jean here just does these minimal agreement. Yeah, yeah. As far as it's concerned, it's acceptable. Yeah. Jean doesn't take a turn. Maggie continues. And Jean laughs down here. So a recipient appreciation of the story. So recipients, give minimal responses, supportive kinds of responsive, and then evaluate the story in some way, show that they're listening and that they appreciate the story. So that's what you expect to see in conversational storytelling. Then this last one, this recipient design work, which we'll talk more about next time. But, when you start telling a story, sometimes you want to be sure that the person you're talking to is understanding the people that are involved. So this is this kind of recipient called recipient design work. So A starts, well, I was the only other one on Ford's, Mrs. Holmes Ford, the cellist. Oh, yes, she's the cellist. So kind of using different formulations of the person's name, the reference to the person, in order to gain recipiency. And then in line 4, B says, oh, yes, I know who you're talking about. Go ahead, tell the story. Oh, yeah, miscellaneous. Okay, so next on the handout is a storytelling between John and Patrick. I'll play it first, and then I'm just going to go through it and show the parts of it as an illustration.
All the other ones too. He's one of the best.
One of the best, huh?
He's one of the best. My best roommate was the one I had in summer school. He was the best one. I only had him for 6 weeks.
Oh.
It was just summer school, but
then
he was the best.
Didn't have him long enough for him to turn bad on you.
That's true too, I guess.
Yeah, my roommate hates me tonight, but that's okay.
Hates you tonight?
Oh yeah, he's mad.
What's his problem?
He was all excited because he's had this girl Donna over for dinner, and he made dinner and all that. She showed up, and she's a funny girl. So I was talking to her while he was making dinner, and then when they were eating, she mentioned something about his spaghetti being stuck together, and so we started picking on him and his food. And then it just went on from there. It just snowballed into it. Don and I just had the best time picking on him and having fun. So finally he said,
"No, that's not nice."
I know it wasn't nice. It sure was funny. So finally he said, "You talk to Don. I'm going to the bathroom." So he disappeared to the bathroom, and I said, "Well, let's see how far this can go." I said, "Donna, you want to step outside for a few minutes?" She goes, "That's great." So he ran outside. We hid, telling our other roommate to tell him that we were outside in the front talking. So when he came out of the bathroom, he went out front to find us, and he couldn't find us. So we went back in, and we sat and waited for him to come back, and he came back, and he was really pissed off.
Johnny, you know that's not nice.
I know it wasn't nice.
You apologize to that boy.
Oh, I will, but Donna was having a good time, too.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. He should understand the humor of it all.
So here at the start, they've been talking about roommates and who has the best roommates and things like that. And then in lines, so we see at the start here, there's already this ongoing topic of roommates. And then in 10 and 11, John brings up this thing about bad roommates. So he makes already relevant here talk about roommates and bad roommates and the roommate who hates him tonight. So this all just shows how the story that comes up is locally occasioned and relevant to something that happened previously in the story. So this happens this way. It doesn't have to happen this way. But if it doesn't happen this way, then often it gets marked. So a speaker can say, this has nothing to do with what we've just been talking about, but I want to tell you this thing anyway, you know? So if it's not locally occasioned, you would expect there to be some kind of marker to show that it's not locally occasioned. And in this case, between John and Patrick, he doesn't have to do that because they've been talking about roommates. And then John talks about bad roommates and then talks about how his roommate hates him tonight. And this, you know, my roommate hates me tonight. Oh, that's nice. Oh, by the way, you know, did the Dodgers win, you know, last night? You know, if somebody says something as strong, uses that kind of affective language, like hates me tonight, that strongly projects more to come. And usually somebody's going to ask about it. Hates you tonight, you know, and that's what happens. So there's this in 13, this thing that strongly projects more talk to come. My roommate hates me tonight. And then Patrick hears that and orients to that as, okay, that's something to talk about. Hates you tonight? Question, rising intonation. Oh yeah, he's mad. And what's his problem? So here's an explicit, you know, invitation to talk about, to tell the story. And then we see starting in line 18, how the AB turn taking gets suspended. So I say gets suspended because what you see after line 18 is longer turns. You know, here's a very long turn by John. So when you see something like this in a transcript, at least for me, it immediately draws my eye and I say, what is going on here? And sure enough, it's a storytelling. Disappeared into the bathroom. This thing has all the characteristics. If you've taken sociolinguistics or talked about Labov and Labov's narrative analysis, it has many of the characteristics of that. Past time verbs, orientation works, scene setting, that kind of stuff. And then we get down here, there's a little pause, and John is about to start again or does an in-breath. And then Patrick says, John, now you know that's not nice. So how else can we analyze what's going on in line 50 when somebody says something like that? John, now you know that's not nice. Like what kind of action is that?
Would that be like an expressive? Because he's like commenting back on his thoughts on the whole situation.
Yeah, it's a kind of expressive. Is there a maybe more specific action or more specific word that we could use?
It sounds like either an assessment or blame.
Okay, assessment or blame.
Someone wrote in the chat scolding.
Say that again.
Somebody wrote scolding in the chat.
Scolding. Okay, is there evidence from the participants for using one of these words, either scolding, blame, or assessment? Maybe assessment is the more general. And the question is it an assessment that is blaming or scolding or both or neither or? John, now you know that's not nice. I know it wasn't nice.
Is it an assessment like he's saying, I know that you know that this was wrong? And John's like, yeah, I agree with your assessment, but.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an assessment. Whether there's more to say about it, like what kind of assessment, I don't know what else I would say about that. You know that's not nice. Yeah.
I feel like it's notable that John is kind of laughing as he's talking about it, and then the other person is not. He kind of just, because he laughs at like 44 mid-talk and 45.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
when
the
listening to it as well, it felt like a tone change when he says, you know, that's not nice.
So so that's building a case to call it something like scolding.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So one person is telling it kind of laughing. The other person, we don't have any indication that there's laughter here by Patrick. Just says he wasn't nice.
And there's the specificity. I'm not coming up with the word for not nice. Like that's exaggerated, not nice. So I would use that to support scolding again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That's pretty specific. You are not being a nice person, rather than, oh my goodness, what a story, or interesting story.
I mean, even the extension on nice, that's not nice.
Yeah, it's good. It's long, it's stretched out. But John says, I know it wasn't nice. Okay.
In the audio, to me, on line 50, it sounds like P is smiling. So.
Smile voice. It's not marked in the transcript. However, the transcript may not be completely accurate.
I don't disagree with you, Sarah.
So that would be, here's where, you know, details in the transcript will be important to make a case that you want to make. You know, sure, you could add any details to the transcript and just make something up, you know, but if you really hear smile voice, that's important to include. I'll listen to that again. Yeah, so here's an assessment, and it's followed by an agreement. So there's some kind of an alignment here. So if Patrick is scolding John, I don't know if John is hearing it as scolding or hearing it as, you're scolding me, but it's not a big deal. Anyway, he agrees with it. And then you apologize. What do we call that action? You apologize to that boy.
A directive?
It is a directive. And can we be more specific? Like what kind of directive? You apologize to that boy. Is it a suggestion or is it something stronger than a suggestion?
No, it's a commandment.
It seems very strong. So a demand, you know, a command. You apologize to that boy. Okay, so that's one example of conversational storytelling. It's locally occasioned, so it comes up at a point in an interaction where it's relevant to tell a story about roommates. And the person doesn't, John doesn't do any kind of explicit marker like, let me tell you this story, or I know this is not relevant, but I'm going to tell you this story, because he doesn't have to do that because it is relevant. It's clearly relevant to tell this story. And Patrick doesn't orient to it as unusual. Like, why are you telling me this? He in fact invites the story. What's his problem? And then tells the story. Let's see. Are there things I should look at in the chat here? Creaky voice. Yeah, this is the marker for creaky voice. John, you know that's not nice. I can't really do it, but that's kind of what it sounded like. And it could be smiley voice. Anybody thinking about writing on conversational storytelling?
I'm considering starting to shift my analysis in that direction after this.
After this, yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That'd be fine. So oh yeah, it's time to go. So yeah, if you have questions about your papers or stuff, let me know. About due dates too, just remember, due dates are for you all as much as they are for me. So, you know, you have to get things done so you can move on to the next thing. And, you know, I have due dates, so I try to plan when I can read things. So it's, you know, it's not a physical law, due dates. They're just things that we need to have on a schedule. So by the end of 11 weeks of class, everything's done. Okay, so I hope you have a good weekend and that you have less stress, or your stress continues to reduce. Remember, we should all be like Schwa, because Schwa has no stress. I'll hang around here if you have questions. Bye.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Have a good weekend.
You too.